My name is Jonathan Ward, and for most of my adult life, I was known in my town of Cedar Hill, Georgia, as a man of unwavering conviction. I worked as a high school history teacher, but in the evenings and on weekends, I became something else, entirely a self-appointed defender of what I believed to be the purest form of Christian truth. I wasn't a pastor, not officially, but I led a group of men who met weekly in my garage-turned-chapel, and our mission was always the same: to protect the church from anything that smelled of superstition or false doctrine. And for me, the greatest of all those errors was devotion to the Virgin Mary. To be clear, I had read about apparitions, miracles, all that, Fatima Lourdes, Guadalupe. They were just footnotes to me, distractions from the gospel. I believed that focusing on Mary was not only unbiblical, but dangerous. I said it out loud, often. She was a vessel. I'd repeat, nothing more. Reverence belongs to God alone. I said it with confidence. I preached it with certainty. And every time I saw an image of her, especially the one that stood outside the old Catholic church on Main Street, with her hands clasped and her eyes lifted toward heaven, I felt a wave of irritation I could never quite explain. I mocked it. A statue can't hear you, I'd scoff. It's plaster, not power. People laughed. Some nodded. A few even said they were thankful for my boldness. Looking back now, I realize it wasn't boldness. It was pride. That year, the Catholic Church in Cedar Hill, St. Michael's, announced they'd be holding a special celebration in honor of Our Lady of Fatima. I saw the flyers downtown, read about it in the local paper. Families would process through the streets, carrying an image of her on a wooden platform, singing and praying aloud. Children dressed as angels would scatter rose petals. It was scheduled for a Saturday evening, just before sunset. I remember feeling something rise in my chest, not quite anger, but a kind of burning urgency to respond, so I did. I borrowed a portable speaker system from the school's drama department. I set it up in the back of my truck and parked across from the church just as the procession was beginning to form. The evening light was golden, almost beautiful, and a gentle wind moved through the town like a whisper. I remember the scent of flowers in the air. It should have moved me. Instead, I turned on the microphone and began to speak. "Wake up, Cedar Hill," I shouted. "This is not faith. This is not faith, is idolatry. There is only one name under heaven that saves, and it is not hers." Some people froze. Others turned around, startled. I saw a woman clutch her child's hand tighter. An older man shook his head in disappointment. But I kept going, quoting scripture, raising my voice, calling it all a lie wrapped in ritual. I didn't care about their tears. I didn't care about the tension thickening in the air like smoke. I believed I was doing the right thing. And when it was over, I drove away feeling triumphant. I told myself I had stood up for truth, but I couldn't have known then that moment so loud, so proud, was the first brick in the path that would break me. The following Sunday, the town was buzzing. Some folks praised my actions, saying I had the courage to challenge a public spectacle of spiritual confusion. Others wouldn't meet my gaze at the grocery store. My wife Meredith didn't say much either. She'd always supported my convictions, at least outwardly. But that evening, when I brought it up again, she simply said, "I think you hurt people." Her voice was calm, but it stung more than any insult. Still, I stayed the course. At our next gathering, I doubled down. "The truth is not always soft," I told the group. "Sometimes it offends. That doesn't make it any less true." Heads nodded. A few men muttered, "Amen." But something in my chest tightened as I spoke. It felt like a thread had begun to unravel quietly, invisibly. Then came the news that the parish would be holding a second event, a candlelight mass, the following Saturday. Again in honor of Our Lady of Fatima. They planned to gather in the park at the center of town, the same place where I'd made my declaration. This time, they said, the mass would include testimonies from local families, prayers for peace, music, and a blessing for all children present. I couldn't ignore it. I told myself I'd go, not to argue, not to interrupt, just to bear witness. I gathered a few friends from our group, and we stood quietly on the edge of the park as people began to arrive. There were no signs, no microphones. We sang low, soft hymns, our voices barely rising above the cicadas. I watched as mothers arrived with strollers, fathers with folding chairs, teenagers carrying lanterns. The altar was simple, just a white cloth on a wooden platform, but at its center was the same statue of Our Lady of Fatima, Edie marked before. This time she was surrounded by lilies and blue ribbons. And then the mass began. The priest, Father Andrew, a young man with kind eyes, spoke of reconciliation, of healing, of the love that binds all people in the heart of Christ. He never mentioned me, never responded to my protest. He just preached peace, and something about that silence, his refusal to condemn, disarmed me more than any counterargument ever could. During the homily, he invited the mothers to bring their children forward. One by one, they knelt at the foot of the statue, some with infants in their arms, others with photos of sons or daughters who were away or lost. One woman, thin, older, maybe in her 70s, wore a plain cardigan and held a framed picture of a teenage boy. She knelt slowly, painfully, and whispered something I couldn't hear. But I saw her face. I saw the way her eyes closed, the way her hands trembled, the way her lips moved, not with demand, but with desperation. It wasn't idolatry I saw in that moment, it was pain, it was faith. A mother crying out to a mother. My breath caught, my throat tightened. The hymns I had been softly singing dissolved in my mouth. That image stayed with me through the night. I lay awake next to Meredith, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the curve of that woman's back, the way she leaned into the silence, as if she knew someone was listening. For the first time in years, a question took root in my mind. What if I'm wrong? It was quiet, barely a whisper, but it pierced deeper than any sermon I had ever preached. By Monday, the world looked the same on the outside, same porch, swing creaking in the breeze, same coffee in the same chipped mug, but inside me, something had shifted. I tried to ignore it. I threw myself into grading essays, cleaning the gutters, fixing the squeaky hinge on the kitchen door. But no matter what I did, I kept seeing her. That elderly woman with the photo, with the prayer hanging like a whisper between her and that statue. I avoided the part. I didn't drive past the church. I turned off the radio when they played hymns I knew were Catholic. And yet, despite all my efforts, a strange silence followed me. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against your chest and makes your own thoughts sound louder than they should. I started waking up earlier than usual, not to pray or read the Bible like I used to, but just to sit, staring at nothing, listening to something I couldn't name. And then, on Thursday, it happened. Daniel, my son, 8 years old, full of life and mischief, woke up with a fever. Nothing alarming at first. Meredith gave him some medicine, tucked him back in, said it was probably just something going around. But by afternoon, he was vomiting, crying from headaches, trembling with chills. By evening, he couldn't keep his eyes open without wincing in pain. We rushed him to the emergency room in Oakville, 30 miles away. And that was where everything unraveled. They did the tests, hooked him up to IVs, took blood, ran scans. But nothing made sense. The fever didn't break. His body weakened. He stopped speaking. On Friday night, the doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, pulled us aside. "We need to keep him for further observation," she said gently. "There's a possibility it's neurological. We can't rule out inflammation in the brain." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just looked at her hands while she spoke, the way they curled nervously around her clipboard. Back in his hospital room, I sat next to Daniel's bed with my fingers wrapped around his tiny, unmoving hand. His breathing was shallow. His eyelids fluttered every now and then, like he was caught in some nightmare he couldn't escape. I whispered every prayer I knew, quoted Psalm 91, until the words felt like dust in my mouth. But nothing happened. No peace. No voice from heaven. Just the steady beep of monitors, and the dull ache of fear digging into my ribs. That night, around 3 a.m., I wandered into the hospital's tiny chapel. It was barely more than a closet with a few chairs, a stained glass window, and an altar. No one else was there. Just me and the dark. I knelt awkwardly on the hard bench. My knees ached. My back stiffened. And then I broke. I cried. Not pretty, not poetic. Ugly, desperate, father-level crying. Why? I asked, over and over. Why him? Why now? What am I supposed to do? The silence was louder than ever. And then, like a crack in a long-sealed memory, I heard her voice in my mind, not audible, but so vivid, I almost turned around. Asked the mother. She turns no one away. I froze. It wasn't a Bible verse. It wasn't something I'd read in a commentary. It was the sentence that old woman had whispered to me after that mass when I had stood like a stone, too stubborn to bend. I had dismissed her words then. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. But now, here in this place, with nothing left to lean on, I couldn't unhear them. I looked up and that's when I noticed it. In the corner of the chapel, partially hidden by a curtain, was a small statue of Our Lady of Fatima. Her white robe was faded, and the gold trim had chipped away in places. A lone candle flickered beside her, casting long shadows across her gentle face. She didn't look powerful. She didn't look commanding. She looked patient. I didn't walk to her. I didn't fall to my knees with a grand gesture. I just lowered my head right where I was, covered my face with my hands, and whispered, "If you can hear me, if you really are a mother, then please help him." I don't know what else to do. It wasn't a theological confession. It wasn't an act of conversion. It was the raw, terrified plea of a man whose child was slipping through his fingers. And then I went back to the room. I expected more of the same. More silence. More monitors. More of that numb, helpless waiting. But when I opened the door, something made me stop. Daniel was sitting up. He was awake, eyes wide, color returned to his cheeks. He turned toward me and smiled. "Dad," he said. Just that. But it shattered something in me. I rushed to him, cradled his face in my hands. He was warm, but not burning. His skin, which had been pale and damp, now glowed softly in the low hospital light. He looked at me and said, "I saw a lady. She was wearing blue. She smiled at me." I couldn't speak. My throat locked. My mind scrambled for explanations, for logic, for reason. But all I could do was whisper, "Thank you." Not to the doctors, though they had done their best. Not to myself, not even in the way I had once rehearsed prayers. Just, "Thank you." From my soul. The doctors ran more tests. Everything came back normal. The fever didn't return. Daniel's energy surged back like a rising tide. Meredith cried in my arms that night, long and hard. The way you cry when fear finally lets go. And there, on the bedside table, was a rosary. Neither of us had placed it there. I asked Meredith, and she said quietly, "The night nurse left it. She said it was a gift." I wasn't sure if we should keep it, but it felt wrong to refuse. I held it in my hands. The beads were worn, the cross simple, but as I touched it, I felt something I couldn't name, like a thread being pulled gently. Not to unravel me, but to guide me. That night, I didn't pray. I didn't preach. I didn't even speak. I just sat beside Daniel's bed, watching him breathe. And for the first time in decades, I allowed the silence to surround me without fighting it. And in that silence, I found something I never expected. Peace. The next few days passed in a kind of quiet awe. Daniel wasn't just better, he was radiant. He laughed more easily, ate with appetite, even cracked jokes with the nurses. The doctors were baffled. One of them, a seasoned pediatric specialist, shook his head and said, "It's like his body reset itself. We have no medical explanation for how fast this happened." Meredith and I brought him home the following Monday. Our neighbors had left flowers on the porch. Some had heard about the hospital, but not the details. Others just smiled and said they'd been praying. I said thank you, over and over, but something inside me hesitated, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I didn't know how to explain what had actually happened, what I had felt, what Daniel had seen, what had changed in me. We put him to bed early that night. Meredith curled up beside him with a book while I wandered into the living room, still holding the rosary. I didn't pray with it. I didn't know how, but I held it like a father holds the hand of a child, learning to walk carefully, unsure, with something like hope. The next morning, I walked into town alone. Cedar Hill was the same quiet, charming, a town where people still waved at each other from porches. But I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Every crack in the sidewalk, every flicker of sunlight through the oaks seemed brighter, sharper, and without planning to my feet led me to St. Michael's, the same church I had once stood across from, with a microphone and fire in my lungs. Now, I stood on the sidewalk with only the hum of wind around me. The statue of Our Lady of Fatima was still there, white, still, her gaze tilted toward heaven. There were fresh lilies at her feet. Someone had tied a ribbon around her wrists. I didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, I sat on a nearby bench, hands clasped, the rosary resting in my lap. I stayed there for almost an hour, just watching. It became my habit that week. Every afternoon, I'd go back, never going inside, never speaking to anyone, just sitting. I began to notice the rhythm of that place, the way the sun moved over the stained glass windows, the quiet footsteps of elderly parishioners arriving for midday prayer, the way someone always left flowers by the statue, even when no one else was around. I didn't feel worthy to step inside the church, not after the things I'd said, not after the way I had spoken with certainty about things I didn't understand, but something kept pulling me back. By Friday, people had started to notice. At the hardware store, someone said, "You're doing okay, Mr. Ward." Haven't seen you at the Bible study this week. At the diner, an old friend sat beside me and muttered, "They're saying you've been seen outside St. Michael's." That true? I didn't deny it. I didn't confirm it either. I just stirred my coffee and changed the subject. But the silence was growing. Not just around me, but inside me. A kind of holy discomfort. Saturday night, I returned to my garage, where our fellowship group usually met. I stood by the table where I'd once slammed my fist while declaring doctrine like law. And I looked at the dusty stack of teaching notes I had written over the years lined with verses, arguments, bold underlines. I picked up one of the notebooks. I flipped through the pages, and I saw it differently. Not wrong, necessarily, but incomplete. Like someone trying to describe the sky with only one color. I closed the notebook slowly. On Sunday morning, I told Meredith I needed to go somewhere. She didn't ask where. She just nodded and touched my shoulder gently. I drove to the hospital chapel again. It was empty, as always. The same flickering candle, the same small image of Our Lady of Fatima in the corner. This time, I approached. I stood in front of her and whispered, "I still don't understand. But I think you helped my son. And I think you've been waiting for me longer than I've been looking." It wasn't a prayer. Not fully. But it was something close. The next week, I avoided church services altogether. I told the group I needed time to reflect, that I was going through a season of discernment. Some were gracious, others weren't. A few said I was being spiritually attacked. One even warned me, Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. But deep down, I knew what I had felt wasn't darkness. It wasn't confusion, it was peace. Still, I didn't know what to do with it. Then, one evening, after dinner, I sat with Meredith on the back porch. The cicadas hummed. Daniel chased fireflies in the yard. The sky turned that deep southern lavender right before dusk. And I told her everything. From the hospital, to the chapel, to the whisper, to the woman with the photo, to the statue that no longer felt like stone. She listened without interrupting. When I finally fell silent, she wiped her eyes and said, "I've been praying for this. Not because I wanted to change you, but because I knew you were afraid to listen." I looked at her, then really looked and realized she had known all along. And maybe, just maybe, she had believed in something for both of us, when I couldn't believe for myself. That night, I made a decision. Not out of pressure, not out of guilt, but out of longing. It was the day of the annual Marian celebration in Cedar Hill, a public mass outdoors, in the open square in front of St. Michael's, just like the one I had once disrupted, with a speaker and a voice full of certainty. But this time, I wasn't on the sidewalk. I wasn't behind a microphone. I wasn't there to fight. I stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a plain shirt, no Bible in my hand, no verses loaded in my throat, just the rosary, the same one left by the nurse, resting in my pocket, each bead like a weight of humility and a promise of grace. The square was full. Choir voices floated through the air. Banners swayed gently in the breeze, and the scent of incense mingled with late spring blossoms. And at the center of it all, beneath a cascade of white roses, stood the image of Our Lady of Fatima, her eyes lifted to heaven, her hands folded in that eternal gesture of mercy. People noticed me. I saw the glances. Some widened their eyes, in disbelief. A few turned away. I heard my name whispered more than once, but I didn't stop. I walked slowly down the center aisle between rows of folding chairs and kneeling figures, while the choir sang "Pray for Us, O Holy Mother of God." Each word broke another wall inside me. When I reached the altar, the priest, Father Andrew, met my gaze. He was the same man who had once responded to my protest with silence, whose peace had disarmed my pride. He stepped forward, held out his hand. I took it. "May I kneel?" I asked softly. His eyes glistened. He nodded. I turned toward the statue and knelt. Not in defiance, not with explanation, but with a soul undone. Tears came fast. I didn't try to stop them. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall freely, like rain watering the soil of something I had buried for too long. I whispered, "Mother, I was wrong. I mocked you. I feared what I didn't understand. I closed my heart, but you never closed yours. You watched over my son. You watched over me. Thank you." Behind me, silence stretched. The choir had stopped. Even the children, usually restless, were still. And then I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. The priest knelt beside me. He didn't speak. He just stayed. And one by one, others approached. Not to question, not to challenge, but to welcome. And then the applause began. Not thunderous, not showy, but steady, gentle, a chorus of acceptance. It wasn't for me. It wasn't about me, it was about return, about mercy, about the home we all long for, even when we don't know we've been away. I stood slowly, turned toward the crowd. I saw Meredith, her hand over her heart, tears streaming silently. Beside her, Daniel, his hair tousled by the wind, a smile wide across his face, and the rosary around his neck. He waved at me. I smiled back as I stepped down from the altar. People touched my shoulder, offered brief embraces, whispered things like "welcome home" and "we prayed for you." One elderly woman, I recognized her now, the one with the photo, approached me, holding a candle. She pressed it into my hands and said, "The light she lit in you, no one can extinguish it." I nodded. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight with something holy. That night, back home, I sat with Daniel on the porch. He asked me what it meant to have a mother in heaven. I told him, it means we're never truly alone. Even when we think no one hears us, she does. And for the first time in my life, I truly believed it. I still don't have all the answers. I still wrestle with things I once thought were simple, but I've learned something deeper than theology. Faith isn't always loud. It doesn't always win debates or stand behind pulpits. Sometimes faith, K-N-E-E-L-S. Sometimes it weeps. Sometimes it whispers, "Thank you," in the dark. And that is enough. If this story moved something inside you, I invite you to be part of this journey. Subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing stories like this. Stories of faith, healing, and grace. Tell me in the comments what this story made you feel. Did it remind you of someone? Did it bring back a memory? Have you ever experienced something that changed the way you see everything? Share your own story. Someone out there might need to hear it. Let's turn this space into a community of souls, finding their way back home.